sorry for the delay because due to the traffic and immediate the effect regarding the money changes of 500,000. So many of them still they are engaged with their own busy schedule. So we are going to, without taking any lengthy description about today's panel discussion. Since July, when the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile willingly to organize the panel discussion in Delhi with the support and help and the suggestions and idea from the Professor Kondapalli, the JNU professor, and we Parliament-in-Exile organized the panel discussion. The topic subject which we have chosen, how important is the Tibet issue to India. It's nowadays, although the matter is very much relevant, but today, much relevant the issues of the Tibet, not only the India, but entire for the global, and of course for the neighboring country. Therefore, we have chosen the title, how important the Tibet issue is to India. And then finally we decided to subtitle the 4-5 matters which is directly linked with the India and neighboring country. We have requested numbers of panelists, but I can say very sorry because the Peter Raji, due to his state some political crisis yesterday, he was in Delhi, but the Chief Minister of the Sikkim government immediately called up him. There is some political crisis. So the topic, the subject regarding the environment, regarding that I think we will miss, but except that the topic, but we have all the panelists are in front of us, and the panel discussion, the vision of this is not only the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile, but many times His Holiness always suggests to us to organize various seminar, conference, panel discussion, roundtable discussion. When I was in Delhi for last 10 years in Tibetan Parliament and Policy Research Center, we did organize the numbers of conference, seminar, panel discussion, roundtable discussion in IIC, sometimes jointly organized with the IIC, sometimes we organize the India Habitat Center with the help and support from the respected Ragiv Mehrotra ji. So, on behalf of the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile and the India International Center, we welcome to you all the very early morning, I think 9:30 and 9. It's such a Delhi for very early. Even then, numbers of, I think, respected distinguished guests are here. So I would like to request to chair today's panel, the panel discussions chair, and then one of the panelists, the Professor Kondapalli ji. I can hand over the mic to the Professor Kondapalli ji.
Thank you very much, Acharya ji. Namaskar. Good morning to you all. We have an excellent panel today to discuss about the importance of Tibet in the international relations, in various other aspects such as climate change and a host of other issues. The distinguished panel includes, to the extreme left, you have all known him, Mr. Ragiv Mehrotra, the trustee of the Foundation for Universal Responsibility for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Then next to me is Mukhi Sahib, He was a former legal advisor of Ministry of External Affairs since 1955 to 64, and a barrister at Lincoln's Inn and Middle Temple. Is an advocate in the distinguished advocate in the Supreme Court of India. We have also, to my right, is Samphel, the director of Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile, Policy Institute, which is at the forefront in conducting research and providing policy inputs on the various aspects of Tibet. A very warm welcome to all of you. And today the distinguished panel will be able to discuss the importance of the Tibet issue to India as well as to the rest of the global community. We have seen in the recent times a number of issues have come up. The learned audience know pretty well that Tibet occupies a very, very important position geopolitically, with over 1 million square kilometers in the Himalayas, in the upper reaches of Himalayas, which constitutes, if we include the other traditional Tibetan areas like Amdo and Kham, constitutes almost the size of India, over 3 million square kilometers territory. So from a geographical point of view, it has a huge significance. It's not a small region, it is a huge region, almost now constituting about a third of the territory of the region here. There is also the population-wise, it has been a very talented population with, for example, in the All India 10th class results in India, the refugee camps in Leh, in Darjeeling, in other places, they have posted very, very high All India rankings, which suggests that even though many of the children of the refugees do not have a formal education like we see in the rest of India, nevertheless they were able to come forward and establish themselves in the All India rankings, which suggests that there is a huge urge among the Tibetan children to excel in their lives. We have also seen in the recent times in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi, Bangalore, Bailaguppe and other places, Chennai, Hyderabad and the rest of other places. We have seen many of the Tibetan students have enrolled in the IT sector, in the software IT related subjects. This reflects to the talent that is building the Tibetan community. So this is a huge development in the recent times. So in other words, talented people, over 1 million people in Tibet and the rest of the world in terms of the diaspora have been able to exert themselves despite very harsh conditions of living and economic opportunities in many parts of the world. We have also seen that despite a very low economic growth rates in Tibet, which is roughly estimated at about $15 billion as compared to the overall China's GDP of about $11.6 trillion. This suggests that there is a huge inequality that is emerging between China and Tibet in terms of the economic growth rates, despite many programs, many plans, many infrastructure projects, many such programs that China had undertaken in the recent times. So this suggests that there is a lot of work to be done at the economic level. Then there is also the faith, Buddhism, which most of the Tibetans, all of the Tibetans have except in those regions closer to Aksai Chin and western portions of Tibet. The rest have the Buddhist faith as the major driver in their religious ideas. So this is one which is now a major dynamic in the rest of the world. As you know that there is the International Convention on Buddhism, which has become very popular, and there are plans for making this as some kind of Buddhist Vatican in the coming years, coming decades. So this is a huge development that is coming up in terms of Buddhism. As custodians of Buddhism, the Tibetan community had preserved these ideas for over a long period of time, and as compared to the rest of the communities abroad where there has been the spread of other ideas, Tibetans have been able to restore, have been able to preserve many of the Buddhist ideas. So from the point of view of faith, there is the increasing and continuing importance of Buddhism. Tibet is also important for the rest of the world because of its geographical location in terms of the climate change issues, which have now been increasingly discussed in Paris, previously in Copenhagen and other places. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was quoted in the WikiLeaks saying that for the next 10 to 15 years, climate change issues are going to be a major driver in the Tibetan community's agenda in the future for roughly 10 to 15 years. So climate change issues, since there are, Tibet is the place for the glaciers and contributes to roughly about 28% of water flows in South Asia and in Southeast Asia in terms of the Mekong, Salween, Irrawaddy rivers. And also about roughly 25% of the water flows into China. This suggests that there is a huge opportunity there for reflecting on the water related issues, and I'm sure the panelists will be able to reflect on many of these issues. As you are aware, recently after the post-Uri surgical strikes, there was some announcement by the Chinese side that they would be blocking some of the water flows in Jammu and other areas. Already in the background of the Parichu Lake incident in Himachal Pradesh, we have seen that the PLA had been barricading some of these water flows in Zanda and other areas in western Tibet region. So water issues will be very significant in the future. So not just the geopolitical location, economic aspects, but also there are many issues which are part of this. Tibet is also important in the recent times as since April this year, 17 of 31 party secretaries have been changed in the preparation for the 19 party Congress next year by the Communist Party. And Tibet has a Communist Party new secretary who is likely to be playing a very big role in the 19 party Congress. Remember, when Hu Jintao was the party secretary in Kansu and Tibet, it has led to a radicalization of the Tibetan community. 1988, the Strasbourg proposals, and subsequently the radicalization in Lhasa and other places. So this is one we need to keep in mind on the developments within China in terms of the preparations for the 19 party Congress. We have seen that till the last decade, the discussions between the government-in-exile and the CPPCC's China People's Political Consultative Conference United Front Work Department discussions with the Tibetan community have been stalled there have not been much progress in the discussions between the two in terms of the autonomy and other demands by the Tibetan community. So in terms of the stalemate between China and Tibet, this issue of preparation for the 19th Party Congress and subsequently the 20th Party Congress are significant. The developments, which include also over 150 self-immolation attempts by the Tibetan community within Tibet and the Tibetan areas in Aba prefecture and the rest of in Amdo and Kham regions of traditional Tibet, and also in other areas where Tibetans have been living in India and other places. The radicalization will have a major impact on also the discussions and the interactions between the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department and the Tibetan community. This is an issue which is of significance in the light of the Chinese preparation for what they call as two centennials, the 100th anniversary of the Communist Party in 2021 and also the People's Republic of China 100th anniversary in 2049. In the two centennials that they are making preparation, Tibet forms a major actor. And so from the Communist Party and its preparations, this is also an issue which is quite a significant aspect. The other issue is obviously there is last 3 years China had made One Belt, One Road as its poster boy in terms of its imprint in Europe, Asia and Africa. This includes huge infrastructure projects, roads, railways, energy pipelines, fiber optic networks, airfields. All of these again are very important for Tibet. We have seen, for example, since last December, there is a new railway line which from Shigatse to Ningchi prefecture, opposite to north of Arunachal Pradesh. The project has already begun. As you all know, in 2006, China had constructed the Tibet Railway connecting between Gormukh to Lhasa, and that has been extended to Shigatse. Now, the line from Shigatse to Ningchi prefecture has already been sanctioned. Another route to Kathmandu is also being planned with the surveys and so on. So this is part of the overall One Belt, One Road projects, which will have implications not just for the military logistics, but also in terms of and other aspects. The One Belt, One Road project, which President Xi Jinping initiated in September 2013, passes of Tibet. Even before the One Belt, One Road projects have been initiated, China had made several infrastructure projects in Tibet. So much so today, some 88% of the counties in Tibet are connected by road or by other infrastructure facilities, which means that the Chinese military now, or the PAP of the People's Armed Police Force, is now able to deploy troops at very short notices from one region to the other regions. And as the Chengdu military region and Lanzhou military region have now been integrated into the Western Theatre in Chengdu, this has now been consolidated in over 6,000 kilometers of the theatre in this region, which basically it intends to the People's Liberation Army and other security organizations now intend to integrate operations in all these areas, including Tibet military, sub-military district, which means that there is a likelihood of the One Belt, One Road projects being made into substantial military integrated operations aspect. So this is of huge significance, and so we need to also keep this in mind, and I'm sure the panelists will be able to these issues. So with this brief introduction, may I request the speaker, Mukhi Sabha, please.
Friends, brothers and sisters from Tibet, friends of Tibet, I have been allotted 20 minutes, but you will forgive me if I go on to about 25 minutes. I've been asked to speak on international law and human rights. Let me begin with the story of three individuals: Al-Mahdi, Pinochet, and Petain. Now, Ahmad al-Faqih al-Mahdi of Mali, which is south of the Sahara Desert, was a senior member of an armed group in the 2010 conflict in Mali. On 29th September this year, barely 2 months ago, the International Criminal Court at The Hague sentenced him to imprisonment for 9 years for his crimes against humanity in Mali, namely the destruction of and directing attacks on religious buildings and historical buildings in Timbuktu, which had been carried out in 2012. The next individual, Augusto Pinochet, was a general in Chile under a coup d'etat supported, sadly, by the United States. He displaced President Allende, who, all said and done, was for the poor and the downtrodden. Pinochet turned Chile into a violent and pernicious military dictatorship. Under his presidency, from 1973 to 1990, 17 years, the most reliable statistics reveal 35,000 people as direct victims of human rights violations. 2,279 were executed, 28,000 were tortured, and 1,248 went missing. 200,000 people suffered exile, and an unknown number were abducted or put under illegal detention. In 1998, Pinochet stepped down as commander-in-chief and went into retirement as senator for life. It was in the same year, 1998, that he was in England when he was arrested there by the British police under a warrant of arrest issued by a court in Spain for crimes against humanity and for extradition. The court in Spain had issued the warrant of arrest against him, exercising what it called universal jurisdiction. Now, many countries in the world are progressively exercising universal jurisdiction. It is the inherent power of the court to proceed against an alleged perpetrator of a war crime or genocide or a crime against humanity, wherever he may be and wherever the crime was committed. Now, after a long legal battle in England and in Chile, the court in Chile decided to proceed against Pinochet in spite of his old age. He was about 90, and in spite of alleged dementia. So he was lucky. He escaped punishment by getting pneumonia and dying in bed. Pétain, Henri-Philippe Pétain, was a World War I French general who became a national hero of France and was honored as Marshal Pétain. After the collapse of France, the German invasion in 1940, he was made chief of state and he collaborated with the Nazi regime and adopted repressive measures against Jews. After the war, Pétain was tried for treason and crimes against humanity. He was guilty and condemned to death. Charles de Gaulle commuted the sentence to imprisonment, and Pétain died in detention, again at age 96. For the world, this is one step in the right direction. Make the person who participates or who gives the orders personally accountable, personally amenable to punishment. Wherever he can be found, this will act as a powerful deterrent. Now, the history of mankind teaches us that there can be no protection of the weak if the tormentors are left free and without fear of punishment. Punishment, quick, severe, is a deterrent and prevents crime in a substantial way. Exposure, imprisonment, and most importantly, confiscation of properties is a sure deterrent. Therefore, my advice to all those who would like to put an end to crimes against humanity is to keep all the evidence ready. Find out the particulars of all who have directed and assisted in the violations: governors, ministers, bureaucrats, generals, police officers, their names, addresses, designations, the testimony of victims and eyewitnesses, and keep these ready. There is machinery available in the form of universal jurisdictions, arrest warrants, extradition, and the international criminal courts and tribunals. Even the head of state can be arraigned. Complaints can be made to UN bodies like the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, the UN Human Rights Council, and also to the Security Council under Security Council Resolution number 1674 of 28th April 2006. And if necessary, assistance can be taken from two top NGOs in the world, Human Rights Watch and Doctors Without Borders. Let us endeavor to develop international law in this direction. Now, there can be no international community without international law. Just as a society cannot exist or function without rules, nations and states cannot coexist or maintain their sovereignty and separate identity without international law. This law is so much of a necessity that even without a superpower or a world government to enforce it with sanctions, it is considered binding and in the national interest. The defiant state is generally treated as a pariah and sooner or later loses influence and power. Now, international law has progressed to give rights to non-states, to individuals, to groups, to minorities, and human rights have become a part of international law. Now, what are human rights? The rights of man, as they used to be called. Human rights are norms which protect people, human beings, anywhere on the planet, from onslaught or abuse in any form or manner by anyone. These rights exist in ethics, in morality, and in law at both the national and international level. These rights are obviously related to the law of nature, the dignity of man. You will recall the famous call of Bal Gangadhar Tilak, "Freedom is my birthright." The right to freedom of religion is a human right. The right to equal treatment without discrimination is a human right. But the first basic fundamental right of human beings is the right to life. Freedom from physical hurt, from torture, from massacre, from homelessness, from starvation. Therefore, the snuffing out of life by whatever means of one human being or many human beings, individuals, minorities, nations, men, women, or children, the destruction of homes and habitations in cities or villages, the dropping of atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the military operations of the People's Liberation Army of China, the military operations and armed conflicts in the Middle East, the scourge of terrorism, bombings, decapitations, massacres, displacement of populations, are all horrendous violations of human rights. In fact, wars and armed conflicts of all kinds, in open form or in the form of terrorism, are the primary and blatant violations of human rights in their most fundamental form. That is why there has always been a yearning for peace, for disarmament, and for the outlawing and the elimination of the use of force. All of us in this hall, of course, are vividly aware that it was by the use of force that Tibet, the people of Tibet, and the Tibetan nation were overcome in 1950. And that too, in spite of the United Nations Charter, specifically Article 2.4. I should read that out. All members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. Now, who will believe that it was not a full-scale invasion analogous to the 1939 push into Poland by Nazi Germany and the USSR? Now, there have been efforts by the international community, world opinion, particularly in the democracies, to outlaw wars and the use of force. The League of Nations failed. The Kellogg-Briand Pact of 1929 for the renunciation of war failed. Mussolini went ahead using force against Abyssinia, now Ethiopia. Hitler went ahead and gobbled up parts of Europe, and World War II broke out with 80 million dead, many more wounded, more than 60 million displaced and rendered homeless. And alas, the Allies, the USA, dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, decimating the civil populations which had not taken part in any military operations and which were not adjacent to any military target. It was then that the world said, enough is enough. And the victorious Allies, describing themselves as the United Nations, bound themselves under the Charter and invited other countries to join. The United Nations Charter binds the members to 4 principal obligations. 1, the elimination of war or any use of force. 2, protection of fundamental human rights. 3, respect for international law. And 4, of course, the raising the standard of life globally and in larger freedom. Now, it is obvious that the use of force is unlawful. It is obvious that giving recognition to what has been brought about by the use of force is equally unlawful. Now I come to human rights. There have been efforts over the centuries to define or describe human rights. We have heard of the Magna Carta of 1215, the English Bill of Rights of 1689, the French Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens of 1789, the Bill of Rights in the American Constitution, 1791, and we are all familiar with the US Declaration that people are endowed with natural rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the most influential formulation so far is the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. Universal because it applies to all and everywhere. This was adopted by the General Assembly, and indeed it has passed into international law as jus cogens, a peremptory norm from which no derogation can be made. Now there is no time for me to read the declaration, and we should indeed keep it by our bedside and remember it by heart, but I shall read only a few articles. Article 3. Everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. 5. No one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. 7. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. 9. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. 13. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his own, and to return to his country. 14. Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. 15. Everyone has a right to a nationality. 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Now, I need not relate the multitude of covenants, conventions, and treaties that have followed the Universal Declaration, starting with the Genocide Convention, the European Convention, ending with the 1998 Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And of course, there are regional treaties and charters for the Americas, Africa, and even the Arab world. This is how international law has developed. I have already dealt with the United Nations Security Council resolution, which is very important. The Security Council has taken up the responsibility of protecting populations from genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crimes against humanity. In conclusion, the real hope lies in more and more countries stressing the universal jurisdiction of the national courts and also strengthening of the jurisdiction of the international criminal courts and other courts and tribunals that have been set up regionally. I do not know what is the view of pacifists, Jains, Buddhists, conscientious objectors or armchair liberals, but I am personally convinced that crimes will never cease unless the criminals are made accountable and deterred by sure and adequate punishment. Therefore, as I've said, the reach to the actual perpetrators of violations of human rights is an essential item for the prevention of violation of human rights. There's no time for me here to deal with the horrendous violations of human rights in Tibet and against the people of Tibet and the Tibetan nation. Several seminars will be needed for that. The massacres, the tortures, the detentions, the spoliation, plunder and destruction of monasteries and nunneries, the arrests, torture and murder of monks and nuns and children, and of course the total clampdown on freedom of expression and freedom of conscience. You cannot keep the picture of His Holiness the Dalai Lama in your house. You will be astounded and horrified by the facts. The annual reports of the Tibetan Center for Human Rights and Democracy, I have 2 copies here, give the bare facts, cold statistics, but the actual human tragedy is intense. Of course, the world conscience is fast asleep thanks to the kind of media we have given ourselves. I shall say one word to my countrymen. We have given asylum and refuge to the people of Tibet, a friendly people, a people truly wedded to the highest tenets of Buddhism, who fled from violations of human rights against them. Less than 200,000 came in. Now not much more than 100,000, as few as 1 lakh in number remain. Let us treat them as brothers and sisters who have temporarily at least lost their country and are in distress. Let us not put silly restrictions on them under the Foreigners Act or the Registration of Foreigners Act. Let us treat them at least on par with our sisters and brothers from Nepal. The articles of the Universal Declaration are very clear. Peremptory norms make human rights available to all, citizens and non-citizens alike. 4 or 5 million Nepalese nationals are living and working in India free from the restrictions under the Foreigners Act or the Registration of Foreigners Act. So also millions of PIOs, persons of Indian origin, who are clearly nationals of other countries and even resident in other countries. No country in the world has raised any objection to putting these foreign nationals at par with citizens of India, OCI, overseas citizens of India. Where is the difficulty in getting rid of the restrictions on Tibetans in India? Why should Tibetans in India be referred to as foreigners when they are clearly asylees? All over the world, asylees and refugees are given the same rights and benefits as nationals, even to the extent of granting them reverse discrimination. If you read My Land and My People of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, you will realize how blessed we are with Tibetans in India. They are few in number, but they are enriching our civilization and our culture. How much in keeping with our ethos if every Tibetan in India has a card entitling him or her to equal treatment with an Indian citizen, plus extra benefits and preferences in reverse discrimination. Thank you. Sorry I took long.
Thank you very much, sir. The presentation is quite appropriate in the light of various other developments in the recent times. The learned audience know that on July 12th, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague had passed a ruling on the South China Sea when the Filipinos have gone in complaints with the Chinese on the 9-dash line, on the fishermen, on the environmental issues as a result of the expansion of the military facilities on the reefs and on the exclusive economic zone related issues on these. The PCA had passed several observations. So this is one issue. The second, a couple of years ago, a local court in Italy had passed strictures on Hu Jintao and others in their policies vis-a-vis the Tibetan community in Tibet during the Chinese policies in the 80s and 90s, post 1988 onwards. So that is a second development which is linked to what the speaker just now had mentioned about the crimes against humanity and other charges. So in the light of these, there is a lot of concern on the rule of law and the other observations that have come up in the recent times for review. The speaker also mentioned about the responses that India ought to make in terms of the Tibetans living in India. As you all know, that in October 2014, the Ministry of Home Affairs had passed a new rehabilitation law, which had mentioned about the job opportunities for the Tibetans in their profession, number one. Number two, in terms of land lease, that is extension of the land lease for the Tibetans who have been living in India and acquiring properties. Thirdly, there is also a Government of India position that the culture of the Tibetans will be preserved in terms of the religious practices, educational aspects, and so on and so forth. So there has been not just the social welfare benefits extended in terms of religion, culture, education, and so on and so forth, but also in terms of the livelihood related issues with the 2014 new rehabilitation law. Of course, as the speaker had mentioned just now, much more need to be done in this regard. So this is also linked to the next speaker's observations on the importance of Tibetan culture. Over to you.
It's always a deep privilege, an honor, and a blessing for me as an Indian student of His Holiness to speak about Tibet and Tibetans and our deep sense of gratitude to the Tibetans for who they are and their continuing significance culturally, politically, and in terms of the environment challenges that India confronts. His Holiness has often described himself as the Chela and India the Guru. And I think the great significance of Tibet's culture is that role has been reversed. And today, India is the Chela, and His Holiness and the Tibetan community are in many ways our gurus and our teachers. Not only was India's great civilizational heritage preserved in the splendid isolation of Tibet, but it has returned to India, enriched and enhanced in significant ways. the Dalai Lama and the Tibetans, and His Holiness in particular, because he is the preeminent Tibetan and the preeminent statesman for our troubled times in today's world, and as we look at the changing face of leadership in the world, His Holiness's eminence continues to rise, both because of his own personal evolution and because the people he stands up amongst continue to diminish and seem to become dwarfs. So I think there's this dual process that is happening. Wherever His Holiness goes and he speaks, particularly in the West, and certainly in India, he is emphatic as to the contribution and the role of India's culture and India's civilization. And today, his great importance to India, we're looking primarily at India and the world, is that he is also India's preeminent cultural ambassador. And people who have been with His Holiness at his conversations with with presidents and prime ministers, and I was told that among his sort of first engagements with Barack Obama, he spent more than half that conversation talking about India's achievements as a democracy, that it has been the repository of the most sophisticated mind training techniques in human history. So we had this the sort of historically Indian civilization, Buddhism, which at that time was the pinnacle of that aspiration, travels to Tibet. It is assimilated by the Tibetan people and processed and enriched. So it's not preserved in a fossilized context and brought back to India when His Holiness comes in. And so what are some of those elements of that tradition that were preserved? So what traveled to Tibet was primarily the wisdom tradition of India. And that was the dialectic method of the Nalanda tradition, to which His Holiness describes himself as the heir. What was the Nalanda tradition? The Nalanda tradition was a completely different approach to education to what we, people like me, have had based on the Western perception of education. So the great universities of the West trained their scholars to approach understanding reality and truth with a cynical, questioning mind, and not to accept it at face value. The dialectic method of the Nalanda tradition was that each teacher, each philosopher, each philosophy of the Nalanda tradition approached reality, or the understanding of reality or the truth, from diverse traditions, and trained its students to understand each point of view. So Nagarjuna had a particular approach, Chandrakriti may have had another approach, and to internalize it and to develop the refutation of that perspective. And then, so the student of one tradition did that with the other traditions. People of the other traditions did it with this tradition. So that led to the acknowledgement of a diversity of perspectives that were, in their realm and in their context, acknowledged as being valid. And you reinforced your understanding of it, or whatever that truth might be, with respect for the other traditions. And so, for example, the Tibetan tradition of debate. Why is that debating is a dialectic process? Why is it so important? It is because the debater, the scholar, the student, puts forth a point of view which is then refuted by his debating partner, two different perspectives engage in process. Then they reverse roles. So I then begin to understand and internalize those different perspectives deeply, and it reinforces my own insight and wisdom. What India confronts today is precisely this challenge that we are unable and unwilling to recognize diverse perspectives as having any value and relevance in themselves. His Holiness has articulated this, the need for this diversity, in a much more accessible way. Again, drawing on India's tradition. And so His Holiness will tell us today that each one of us needs a different mental diet, depending on our mental dispositions. And it was not very long ago, 2 years ago I think, that when it was Swami Vivekananda's anniversary. And speaking on that occasion, His Holiness says, well, you know, Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda, their legacy was one of my great learnings. And what was that learning? That learning was that Swami Vivekananda articulated 4 yogas. I'm not going to go into it in what Swami Vivekananda said. But basically, he articulated that aspect of Indian tradition, which said that if you were a certain kind of person who had a great deal of capacity for love and devotion, you became a Bhakta yoga, some yogi, because you were a man of action, and the Jnana yogi, the process of intellect, the Raj yogi, the person of spiritual practice. And so each one of us manifests that in different degrees. So the great importance of Tibet's culture, even though it was not inherently as diverse a country as India is, has been that His Holiness has brought in the vocabulary of the celebration of diversity, not tolerance, not just understanding, not looking just at the commonalities of it, but being able to acknowledge and celebrate diversity. The other aspect that the Tibetans synthesized for us was, so they brought these together, and you had the Tantrayana method. And you know, people less educated, tend to associate Tantrayana with only one aspect, the sexual aspect, and they put it aside, was the synthesis of the wisdom tradition, which was the Nalanda tradition, and practice. So today we have access to the most sophisticated mind training techniques in human history, developed in India, enhanced in Tibet, and brought back to us. And today, His Holiness, as the cultural ambassador of India, presents that to the world. He's taken that understanding further by his engagement with science, the scientific method. And so His Holiness has had, every year, he has 2 or 3 conversations with the most eminent scientists in the world. That engagement with science is not seeking validation in the manner that much of sort of India's Hindu revival, I don't know how to describe it, it embarrasses me to be in the manner that Hinduism has been projected on the political stage, is to but look at what we can learn from contemporary knowledge, while not compromising traditional knowledge and wisdom. So what His Holiness is saying to us in India is that while we embrace development, while we embrace science, we need to have the humility to recognize that if there is something that science disproves, then we have to accept it. But just because science doesn't prove something doesn't mean it's not valid. It's very important that we look at how a great spiritual master is embracing science, using it and learning from it. And a minor aside, I had the privilege of traveling with His Holiness last year to Cambridge University in the UK for a conversation, moderated a dialogue between His Holiness and Rowan Williams. And Rowan Williams is the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who was working to promote the ordination of women. And in the Anglican Church, these things are put to vote by the parishes, and they voted against it, and so he resigned in protest. So he said in his address that we are grateful to the Tibetans and to the Dalai Lama for enabling people across faiths, by creating, doing the groundwork for the engagement in science. Because science is not, science is to be respected, not merely because it is reason and logic based on all these things, but because all aspirations, all traditions, all philosophies must embrace, process, digest all contemporary knowledge, not just the Buddha said, or X said, or Y said. Only then does it become relevant and valid, and it is what has made Buddhism today the world's fastest growing religion. We've just had requests from UAE, Jordan, and Kuwait for Arabic versions of His Holiness's books. So even in these countries, I was startled and excited to read as to how the appeal of His Holiness in Buddhism is even growing in Islamic countries. I mean, it's still embryonic, but who would have imagined that it would get even a foothold in that universe? But it is doing much more than that. So anyway, to go back to this idea of what he learns from science and what enables him, that worldview, to go to a mosque, put on a skull cap, and perform the namaz. To go to a church, a cross hangs around his neck, and he'll sing a Christian hymn. He'll go to a Hindu temple, and he'll do the arti, and he will take the blessings of the fire. The preeminent spiritual leader of a tradition has the confidence to do this in public. And when he spoke about Sri Ramakrishna, what does Sri Ramakrishna do? And I'm sharing this as a juxtaposition of our traditions and heritage. Sri Ramakrishna was a temple priest, a temple pujari, an illiterate temple pujari. He, outside the precincts of the temple, he builds what they call a kutir in Bengal, and he practices Islam, Sikhism, Christianity. Not just practices in terms of lip service, but lives the life of a Muslim, which means his diet, his clothes. That inspires me. Today, His Holiness is able to do almost that. And we had the privilege again of organizing a visit by His Holiness to the places of different places of worship in Delhi, call it Pray for India. Ironically, it was most difficult for us to find a Hindu place of worship that was willing to host, of course, His Holiness, but not in the inner sanctum, but people of other faiths. The position was that if you are a Muslim, and I know that you are a Muslim, you cannot enter my space. And this is not a problem we just had in Delhi. We wanted to do a similar initiative in Kerala, which is for all its diversity. The Hindu temples would not allow us to go in. So the importance of this heritage is self-evident in these, these how do I put it, times, these fractious times that India confronts. I could go on these, and I would just flag a few other ideas, but this time it's a working day morning. The Tibetans brought back to India the idea of the Bodhisattva, which was, I mean, to those who really who engage in the understanding of the Bodhisattva at an emotional level, is that you seek enlightenment, which means that you break out of the traditional Indian understanding of the cycles of birth and rebirth. So nirvana is not for the self. Nirvana is in order to teach and serve humanity. So you voluntarily, I mean, just think of it, you voluntarily experience rebirth and the suffering of old age, sickness and death, and a lot more in today's world, in order to teach and serve humanity. You give up the option. Now, if you could just try and juxtapose that aspiration with the leadership that governs us today and their aspirations. So His Holiness and the Tibetan people, and he was talking about the success of the Tibetans in India, and I have to flag that it is the presence of a displaced people in India, despite Mukhi's reservations, and they're valid and genuine and real, is one of the most successful success stories of the displaced people in human history, who have been encouraged by the host country to retain their culture and to retain their identity. And having done so, 60 plus years in exile, have remained, emphasis, remained welcome by their hosts. There is usually a conflict between the host country's culture and the people who come in and are pressured and are almost obliged to embrace the culture of the host country, both legally and culturally. In the United States, when you take up citizenship, or in Britain, you are tested on your knowledge and your background and your understanding of the Constitution and the elements of its culture and language. So I think India deserves some credit too for this process. And the process has been made complex. We need to try and understand it when we're looking at the importance of Tibet and the Tibetan people in India, is that the aspiration of the Tibetan people to retain their identities so much that they can one day return to their own country as Tibetans. And hence the ambiguity about their Indian identity and their Tibetan identity, and what is the balance between those identities, the balance between their assimilation into India as Indians and to retain being foreigners. So one day they are not Indians going back to Tibet, but going as Tibetans going back to Tibet, and the impact that this process of Indianization might have on the people within Tibet, of those, many of the elites who have left. So the importance of Tibet's heritage is one, their assimilation, their integration into India is second. And finally, I've already, I think, hit my 20 minutes, is His Holiness' position on the empowerment of women. There are few cultures in India where you see Tibetan women on par and as in power as they are. And I was just having a conversation with Madhuri Sandhiji, sort of on the incredible initiative of His Holiness in awarding Geshe-ma degrees to Tibetan nuns. This is a historic moment that we have not appreciated, and particularly in the context of how to put it, the way the new UN, the new President of the United States has viewed and talked about women, and yet had obviously a majority of women voting for him. And contrast that with the Dalai Lama, who goes as far as saying, look, the next Dalai Lama could be a woman. And why could it be a woman? Because what His Holiness is saying is that I, Tenzin Gyatso, may or may not reincarnate. No, sorry. I, Tenzin Gyatso, will reincarnate in order to teach and serve humanity. Whether it will be as the Dalai Lama or not is not important. It will be as the Dalai Lama if the institution of the Dalai Lama is needed and wanted. And the Dalai Lama will be a man or a woman, or born in Tibet or India, but not in China, in whatever space, context and manner that is most useful. So it is not the institution of the Dalai Lama per se that is significant, but what is significant is what value it can add to other people's lives. So the institution of the Dalai Lama could be a woman. The Dalai Lama could be a woman. There are few faiths, and I don't know how many of which they are, because the diversity of Hinduism, there are some strands where the Brahma Kumaris and a few other sects that have a preeminent role for women. But certainly in the history of Buddhism, and much of Indian history, that His Holiness, from the time he came into exile, felt that it was important that women should have an equal role, ultimately, in an evolutionary way, and not just by decree. So it was accepted, and it was incremental, and so it would be resisted. So it's using skillful means. He started the ordination of nuns, the education of nuns, and today they have completed, actually, but the formal conferment will happen on 20th December or so in Reponsibility Monastery in South India, where they will receive these geisha degrees, which will put them on par in terms of the educational attainments of monks. And with that come the entitlements that geisha degree brings. Now, like in our traditions in India, anyone can put on ochre or wear white and call himself a Swami. Similarly, in the Tibetan tradition, anyone can wear monk's robes and call them lamas. And there are many fake Tibetan lamas who have done that, or lamas who have moved beyond the sanctity of their role. But in terms of the institutional authority that confers on a human being, now, monk or nun, man or woman, the right to teach and the right to transmit the teachings is now equally available to men and women. So it is a whole process, right from his political renunciation and to the fact that he is constantly reaffirming his ambassadorship of India's culture, that Tibet's culture has enriched India, and we are deeply grateful and blessed that this has been possible, and that we have been able to live in India at a time when the Tibetans came in, the Dalai Lama came in, and I think it is a great blessing that we have been able to live at the time and to have had the possibility of seeing his Dalai Lama, listening to him, and certainly globally, I think the last time this happened may have been, Mahatma Gandhi, and so I think we honor as Indians to Tibetan culture, and of course, His
Thank you very much for that presentation on integrating aspects of philosophy, religion, institutions, gender, and a host of other issues. The organizers asked me to speak on the impact of Indian foreign policy on Tibet. I would flash just a few points on this aspect before we break out for tea. Number one, in the 1940s, we found ourselves, soon after the British left, we found ourselves in terms of defining our borders, defining our latitude, longitude, or in other words, the Westphalian kind of construct. And as a result, we have faced this dilemma. Soon after the People's Liberation Army marched into Tibet, we faced this dilemma for the first time in our history of a huge armed force on our borders, and independent Indian borders. So, in the light of the 1957 visit by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and also 1959 taking refuge, we have extended the courtesies for a spiritual leader. So the state related issues have impacted on India-Tibet-China relations in the 1940s and 50s. So this is one major impact in terms of the foreign policy. The second is foreign policy. Indian foreign policy has to now address the issue of rehabilitation of the refugees and the permits and the social welfare related issues which have come up since the 1950s and 60s. So this is another major impact in terms of the Indian foreign policy on Tibet. The third, I think, impact is in terms of the trans-Himalayan region, which has been kept dormant over a period of time, but today is now becoming active in the light of what China is doing in Tibet and the rest of the other places in terms of the One Belt, One Road projects. So there is now an effort to construct these strategic roads, railway lines projects. There is also the legal institutions, legal guarantees in terms of the environmental protection and so on. We have been able to factor in the environmental issues in the Trans-Himalayan region. So sustainable development, while we have had the strategic roads and other infrastructure projects, there is also the element of environmental protection and other issues. So this is one which from an impact on India on Tibet, this is a third major development. And related to this is, I would say, Indian foreign policy since 2001 had been stressing on spreading of democracy in the immediate vicinity, but also in global affairs. Prime Minister Modi made this comment in Tokyo in 2014 September, where he mentioned about the spread of democracy abroad. This is the first Prime Minister who mentioned spread of democracy other than the South Asian region. Previously it was Pakistan, Bhutan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Maldives. These are the areas where Indian foreign policy emphasized on its ideological aspect of spread of democracy, but this is the first time this has been mentioned in the global affairs. And so as a result of this, we have substantially expanded our contribution to the Democracy Fund in the United Nations and other international institutions. This is the first time where we expanded substantially our contribution on this aspect. Now, as you all know, that since 2011, the intensification of democracy among the Tibetans has been enhanced. This is the time when His Holiness the Dalai Lama had made the comments in relation to, as Mr. Mehrotra had mentioned, not just about the institutions, but not just about the personalities, but about the institutions. And hence the significance of the role of Sikyong has increased substantially in terms of the temporal duties of traditionally which are mentioned as part of His Holiness responsibilities, spiritual and temporal. Since 2011, we have seen that the intensification of democracy coincided with the Indian foreign policy emphasis on the spread of democracy. So I think the fourth aspect binds Tibet and China and India in this ideological aspect, which is the spread of democracy. We have seen in the last two elections, there is in the Parliament-in-Exile, we have seen intense discussion, intense participation, over 88% and above percentage of voting pattern in the community. That should augur well in terms of this issue of democracy and so on. So I think these four aspects are at the roots of the impact of Indian foreign policy on Tibet. I thought I should put this on the table before we break for a tea break. Thank you for your attention.
Before the tea break, I would like to honor the Shri Ragiv Mehrotra because some official tasks. Rajiv ji have to leave after the tea break. Thank you so much, Rajiv Mehrotra ji. It is my pleasure because when I was studying in Central Institute of High Tibetan Study, that was in 88 or 89. And it is also one of the dreams of the Tibetan community entire. And for the, when I was in Sarnath in 1989, the Nobel Peace Prize was announced to honor His Honest Life. And not like in today, there's no such a media channel. Only the India's Doordarshan is available. And everyone is watching and waiting for the 10th December, the 1989 program. And everyone have heard this program will be telecast through the Doordarshan. And from there I knew, when I heard your name, and most of the Tibetans, I think, from there, the well-known about the Rajiv Mehrotra ji, and particularly after the 1989, when honored the His Honest Lama, the Nobel Peace Prize, and the foundation was started. And from there till today, Rajiv Mehrotra ji is associated with the Tibetans, entire with the culture, but as a director of the Universal Responsibility of the His Honest Foundation. Because of his busy scheduled some official tasks, Rajiv will be, I think if you have any questions, we will not able to be here, but after the tea break, we have two panelists. Professor Kondapalli ji will speak later after the tea break, which already briefed about 4 or 5 points. And our Tibet Policy Director Institute, the respected Thubten Samphel can also speak. And after that, we have a question and answer. Till 1 p.m., the auditorium is with us. So I would like to request Professor Kondapalli ji on behalf of the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile to honor the Rajiv Mehrotra ji. We have some small souvenirs to the Shri Rajiv Mehrotra ji, and thank you so much. You are valuable and well experienced and most close to the His Honest institution and His Honest itself. Really, you have within 20 minutes you have given a huge, I think, brief about the Tibetan culture and values of the Tibetan culture.
I would just like to add that I really am not worthy of this honor. It's really to be able to work for and with His Holiness is really the ultimate blessing. And I should also add that I really don't have official business because nothing would be so important as being here, but I have a cremation to attend. And that's why I crave forgiveness, because I always feel people who leave prematurely that it's an impolite thing to do. So it's not official business, but it's something that's sort of inescapable. So I seek forgiveness from abandoning this very important conversation. Thank you very much.
Let's resume the presentations in this session, post-tea break session. Now the speaker is Mr. Thubten Samphel. He is the director of the Tibet Policy Institute, and he will speak on the status of Tibet.
At the very outset, I would like to thank the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile and India International Center for giving me this opportunity to speak to you. It's a huge honor and privilege. Professor Kondapalli, I would like to talk about the status of Tibet and how Tibet is important to India. As I see it, Tibet is important to India in three areas. One is geopolitical, the other is cultural, and the third area is environmental. So geopolitically, Tibet kept the peace between India and China for thousands of years. This is because Tibet served as a buffer between Asia's two very ancient cultures. The Swedish explorer called Tibet the greatest upheaval and eruption on the face of the earth. Tibet is almost 3 miles up in the sky, covering an expanse of more than 2.5 million square kilometers. So because of this fact, there was peace between India and China. And lately, during the time of the British Raj, Tibet served as a buffer between British India and an expanding Tsarist Russian Empire. So as you know, this buffer was reached in 1950, and India and China came to blows in 1962. So though this buffer has been breached, today Tibet serves as a cultural bridge. As you know, starting from the 6th century, the Tibetans transmitted Buddhism from India to Tibet. And this completion of the complete transmission of Buddhism and its transplantation in Tibet took a course of over 5 centuries, from the 6th to the 12th. So during the course of this time, Tibetans were able to transplant Buddhism in Tibet and then catalog the Buddhist wisdom. So later, especially during the reign of the 5th Dalai Lama, Buddhism spread from Tibet to the whole Himalayan belt. From Ladakh, the northern pockets of Himachal Pradesh, northern areas of Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan, and Arunachal Pradesh. So His Holiness Dalai Lama has said, this is India's front line. So he spoke in military terms. So because of the spread of Buddhism throughout the Himalayas, we feel that this whole area is intimately oriented towards India. So, and the other area where Tibet serves as a bridge is between Buddhism and the increasing number of Chinese today in China who are attracted to Buddhism, specifically Tibetan Buddhism. So in this way, I think China's Global Times considers Tibetan Buddhism as the fastest growing religion among young, educated Chinese. So in a way, attraction of young Chinese to Tibetan Buddhism is by default young Chinese attraction to the wisdom of ancient India. So I certainly feel this is India's soft power, which should be promoted and should be considered one important element of India's comprehensive national power. The other area where I think, as Ragiv Mehrotra said very eloquently, is the spread of Buddhism to the wider outside world. And here, where I think Buddhism has provided a great service to the wider international public, is the countless Tibetan Lamas' message to the outside world, and more prominently His Holiness's message that Buddhism has incorporated into its message the ability to teach human beings to tame and to control and to regulate the human mind. So in this way, I think this inner technology, inner science of Buddhism is relevant to everyone. This practice goes beyond religion. This ability to appreciate the human mind's capacity to make ourselves more productive, happier human beings is relevant to everyone. So in this way, this message has also enabled the wider world to appreciate the ancient wisdom of India. Where I think two areas where India needs to watch is, one is geopolitical, the other is environment. Geopolitically, as Mr. Shrikanth Kondapalli said, China is in the process of expanding its one belt, one road policy. So this one belt, one road policy is a revitalization of the ancient Silk Road. So I feel, I might be wrong, but I feel that this is an attempt by China to spread its influence. And here, Tibet plays a very important role. The railway line linking Kormo, China and Tibet, and then expanding this railway line to Nepal will, publicly China says, is to build up infrastructure, to increase trade between China throughout Central Asia and to Europe. But here in South Asia, I think China's attempt to link Tibet with a railway line to Nepal is to expand China's influence. So in a way, already, from my perspective, for all practical purposes, Nepal has become another province of China. The other more relevant this issue where Tibet is truly important to India and to the rest of Asia is Tibet's the environment. Chinese scientists consider Tibet to be the water tower of Asia, the third pole, and the third pole feeds all the glaciers of the Tibetan plateau, feed all the 6 major river systems that give life to billions of people in South Asia, in China, and Southeast Asia. So environmentalists say that the river waters originating from Tibet feed about more than 40% of the Earth's total human population. So, and these days China is engaged on damming many of the rivers which flow from Tibet. So China's ability to regulate the river waters which originate from Tibet and feed millions of lives downstream is an attempt by China to use rivers as a political tool. So in this way, what China does in Tibet is not a problem of the Tibetan people alone. It becomes all Asia problem. So with these few words, I would like to conclude my remarks, and thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about Tibet. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The speaker had mentioned 3 main issues: geopolitical location, the cultural aspects of Tibet, and the environmental issues. These are very important, especially his comments on the buffer zone, previously for centuries, which has now been punctured with the expansion of the empires, both the Qin dynasty and the PLA in the 1950s. The buffer zones are gone, and as part of globalization, with the expansion of the infrastructure projects, the buffer zones are also vanishing in these times of infrastructure projects expansion. The other aspect which is crucial is also the Buddhism in terms of cultural status of Tibet. Third, on environmental issues, especially in terms of the water and various others. This has been one interesting comment that he also made. Is another interesting comment also is that the expansion in Tibet also led to encroachments on the other countries, Nepal for instance. Over 5,000 to 6,000 Tibetans used to escape Tibet every year, and now it has now come down to about 230, 220 a year. This is partly as a result of the PAPF, People's Armed Police Force, strengthening the border regions, and also surveillance and control over the Kodari Road, which is the main area where these refugees would flow. So this is one, but China is going ahead of these. Frequent reports of the PAPF intruding into Nepal, deeper inside Nepal. Soon after the monarchy before had agreed to Tibet as an inalienable portion of China. Since then, there has been that clause has been reiterated in the Nepal-China joint statements, and an implication of the inalienability of Tibet as part of PRC is also the legal aspect, which is to chase the refugees from within Nepal and arrest them, put restrictions on their flow. So this has been one in Nepal. The PAPF or local frontier guards chasing the refugees deeper inside the Nepalese borders, Nepalese territories. Not just in Nepal, we have seen Bhutanese previously complaining about the intrusions in Chumbi Valley and other places. Not just in Nepal and Bhutan, but also recently in Afghanistan, which is towards the west of Tibet. In Badakhshan province, in Wakazir corridor, there have been some reports about the PAPF intruding into the Wakazir corridor. So it's happening, and so the speaker's observation about the vanishing of the buffer zones is reflected in these forward movement of the PAPF troops in these areas. So that is one. We have also seen in the other parts of the lower levels of Himalayas, in Myanmar, in Kokang, Shan, Kachin states, we have seen about 55,000 people who were driven away to Yunnan province in the local kind of skirmishes. So it's happening all across the Trans-Himalayan borders as the buffer zones are vanishing. So this poses a main concern in terms of the management of the borders, in terms of the previously in 20th century, previously we have looked at the latitude and longitudes as sacrosanct in the UN Charter, as the previous speaker had mentioned, in terms of the Westphalian construct of 1600s on the sanctity of the borders. That is vanishing as a part of this globalization and as a part of the several of the non-traditional security issues that have come to the fore. The other point that I would also flag, Samphel had mentioned, is on the water issues. This is a major concern. Dr. Manmohan Singh raised this issue with Xi Jinping in Durban meeting in their bilateral contacts in 2013. Generally in multilateral discussions we don't bring in the bilateral, but the issue was so serious that he had to raise this issue with President Xi Jinping in South African meeting of the BRICS meeting. So the environmental issues, especially in relation to water, has also spilled over into the and as we discussed before, in the light of the Uri attacks and surgical strikes, we had the Prime Minister attending a meeting on the Indus water. Soon after that meeting, we also saw reports about China blocking some of the water flows through Zangmu and other places. So water issues still constitute a major constraining feature in relation to Tibet and the lower riparian states. So that's those 3 points are well maintained. So now I think we should go for the Q&A, and if there are any queries in these presentations. We had one on the legal aspects, one on the cultural aspects, another in terms of the impact of Indian foreign policy on Tibet, and also then 3 issues highlighted by the previous speaker on the status of Tibet, from geopolitical, cultural, environmental issues. Now, yes, Prem.
I was just wondering, is there any possibility of Tibet uniting with India, merging with India? Because now that the Dalai Lama is here, the trade, the trade relations, the education, the politics, there's so many spheres in which Tibet needs help in the assistance of India. So, how much can India impact Tibet?
Would any speaker like to?
I didn't understand the question.
Can Tibet join India?
How much can India impact? No, I'm talking different spheres, yeah. Different spheres like education, for example. There's education needs there. Then there's trade needs there. And there are a whole lot of social needs there. So on all spheres, how much can India impact Tibet? Because it is impacting as it is to some degree.
Can I add to her question?
Yes.
And
Yeah, sure.
Friends, my name is Dr. Kamal Towri. I was in IAS for a long time, and then now we are working for operationalization. Any suggestions, ideas need to be operationalized. Now I have 2 points to add to your point. There is need to take both of China, Tibet and India in the context of our time. 2-3 points. I am not sure. It will never happen, I think, that Tibet can know that is out. But let us see what can be scenario. There are not many historical and cultural and other relationships, agree. But if you take the India in a holistic manner, from all angles, not only these 3-4 angles which were mentioned there, but a holistic angle, jobs, diversity, challenges, corruption, nepotism, and over-governance, I call. India is a highly over-governed. And there is a China. With all their strengths, I find it is very difficult to talk of these sort of propositions. Just can't even think. But this forum here and acceptability of Dalai Lama all over the world and a man with really great leadership can we come out with some marketable ideas. For example, religion is a force. So can we put upon it the climate change as a challenge, the development goals as a challenge, human rights as a very big challenge, and human rights again in a holistic manner. The climate change is there, the biodiversity is there. Can human live in isolation by killing all the other elements of biodiversity? So the questioning level has to be raised, and questioning level has to be also linked up with operationalizability. Third and last point, with all the due regards to Tibetans who are there, and somebody suggested Tibetans may go back to Tibet someday. Well, one can always wish, pray, but let us accept the realities of our time. So can the level of understanding both of China, Tibet, India, lessons of the past, now it's more than 30-40 years, the acceptability of the world and the future challenges, both of India, because if India has been very accommodative to different religions, people and all, that's all right. But that also needs to be marketed. So my last point is, can there be more and more dialogue, either here or in Dharamshala or in say university? We'll be very happy to organize some dialogue in Vardha, place where I stay normally, my birthplace, and come out with operationalizable, doable, implementable, and all that we need element of Shubha Labha. Unless there is ethical profit, ethical gain, ethical name, ethical recognition, all discussions will remain only discussions. So if we are really interested, and which I hope we are interested in operationalization of the questions and the options before us. So I think I really enjoyed this presentation today morning, and the question which she raised, but I thought the issues have to be holistically taken into implementable level. Thank you very much.
Can I continue on this?
Very good, very good. Let us continue on the
Very interesting point raised by Ragiv. I am General Omar, and I've been associated with the with Dharamsala for a very long time. In fact, my father was also, you all would know. I tend to disagree with this fact that we cannot get across to Tibet into China. The point raised by the lady is very pertinent. China is pressing for trade. In fact, trade is already continuing through Nathula. Our pilgrims are going to Kailash Mansarovar, and they would be only too happy to carry on with that, but it's got this political and geopolitical implications. However, I always maintain and stress that something that can be engaged is culture and religion. For that you do not need armies and boundaries and so on. And India and Tibet are so closely related. And if you come to think of it, the western portion of China, because I visited China about 2 years ago, and there also you have the monasteries and the Tibetan culture is flourishing. In fact, in Beijing itself, I saw the Tibetans moving around freely and practicing their culture in the main parks. So therefore, I think we should not really close all this, but give it an open thought as to how we can link it up together. Maybe peace could be restored by this way.
I think I quickly want to add on the Buddhist spread in other parts of China. Please remember that all Buddhist associations in China have a party committee, Communist Party committee. In other words, a head monk will be a party member. And there is a national monastery rather than anything connected to the international. So it's a different animal altogether. So please keep that in mind.
No, I've been to these monasteries. I've interacted with the lamas there. And the impression that I got was that religion, the Buddhism, as being practiced in Tibet, is being freely practiced here. Yes, they would retain a control. All governments do that. But the fact of the matter is the basic foundation is still there, which could be built on. That was my point.
Right.
We'll come to.
To add to all the comments, very interesting comments made, my addition is that the basic tragedy of Tibet was in a way precipitated by British India. In 1904, British invaded Tibet. Sorry. So at that time, Manchu China perceived Tibet as its secure backyard. They felt that the Himalayan region and the wide, vast expanse of the Tibetan plateau will prevent any hostile power from climbing over the mountains and then traversing this Tibetan plateau to attack or to invade China. So when the British were able to do this successfully, it compelled Manchu China to secure its backyard. So in 1910, the Manchu General Dao Fang invaded Tibet in an attempt to secure Tibet more firmly to China. So in this way, I think what in the dialogue process, what prevents China from proceeding with the dialogue process is that it's unstated suspicion that with the return of the Dalai Lama to Tibet, there would return Indian influence in Tibet. So this, I feel, prevents China from going forward with the dialogue process. So in a way, my sort of suggestion or my sort of idea is that if there is a firm friendship between China and India, this will enable India as an honest arbiter to persuade China to give autonomous existence to the Tibetan people, to develop our culture, our language, our way of life. So I think better understanding and friendship between India and China will enable India to act on behalf of the Tibetan people and to speak to the Chinese government in a way which will not create suspicion in the minds of the Chinese.
I would like to support that. I would like to add Muhammad Iqbal made this poem of Hindustan Hamara. In that poem he said, Himalayas are our pasban, Himalayas have protected us. But the situation has changed completely now. India and China have to coexist. One cannot disappear. Both have to live together. And if both have to live together, a method has to be found where both of them join together in order to support and nourish Tibetan autonomy. That would solve most of the problems. And therefore I think the direction of all well-meaning people should be to avoid any confrontationist methods, seek cooperation, get rid of all the tensions that are there. I will divulge a secret. When I was in the ministry and I was asked to look at the legal aspects of the Sino-Indian border, of course I found that the McMahon line was between India, British India, Sir Henry McMahon, and the Prime Minister of Tibet, Longchen Shatra. But I advised that when two large countries have a problem, it can only be solved amicably, either through arbitration or through negotiation. But it has to be solved amicably, because no large country is going to say, I am wrong, you are right. Both will say, we are right, I am right. And therefore this has to be resolved. So whatever the disputes and differences that may exist have to be resolved. And this will only benefit the Tibetan people, because then there would be a good chance of their remaining autonomous and without any violation of human rights.
The situation is that we are giving importance to Central Asia in the terms of Silk Route, but we are not giving it due importance as a passage of humanity, passage of Middle Africa, passage through Midway Asia, and passage through Midway America. These passages have to be worked out very on the humanitarian grounds, just like the law of the oceans that we have discussed. There are deserts where Kumbh takes place. Every time, as we tell here, the Kumbh takes place, the largest congregation of humanity. Even in the Akbar, Hajj takes place. So, how many deserts in the world are connected? China is controlling over the deserts of Central Asia, and there is no.
My question, sir, is on the proportion of population between the native indigenous Tibetans and the settler Hans. What is the proportion in Tibet? Because that has a vital role in deciding the future of Tibet as a separate country. And not only in Tibet, but also other places like Inner Mongolia and Manchuria, where colonization by the Hans has occurred. And if the Tibetans could make a common cause with these other people whose lands have been colonized by the Hans, then I think there may be a brighter future. So could you please tell me the proportion of Hans and Tibetans in that area? Thank you.
I think the proportion is a very rough guess. I mean, according to our statistics, we say that throughout Tibet, throughout the entire Tibetan plateau, there are 6 million Tibetans, with an estimated 7.5 million Chinese. who are settled in eastern and northeastern Tibet, in Kham and Amdo. However, according to Chinese statistics, they say the Tibetan population of the entire plateau is 5.5 million people. So at this moment, we don't have any estimate of the number of Chinese settled in Tibet. However, the Chinese choose to settle in urban centers. For example, Lhasa, the major urban center in Tibet, is these days mainly Chinese. However, Chinese, those who are settled in Tibet, they are there as migrant workers. They work in Tibet to increase their income, and after a period of this 3 years, they return to Tibet and then encourage their family members or relatives to work in Tibet, because it's easier to compete with the Tibetans. So these days, one phenomenon which is of concern to us is the number of Chinese tourists visiting Tibet. The tourism department of the Tibet Autonomous Region say that about 23 million Chinese tourists have visited Tibet. However, the Washington Post Bureau in Beijing disputes this number. They say there are not enough beds, hotel rooms to accommodate 23 million Chinese tourists. So anyway, this Tibet is considered a favorite tourist destination by the Chinese because of it's culturally very different, and because of Tibet's vast this open spaces. So these are facts as I understand them. I wouldn't know whether I answered your question or not, but these are some of the basic statistics I would like to offer to you.
He has a second aspect of the question, which is there a coordination between Tibetans, Mongolians, and others?
Oh, yes. I think we Tibetans will be saved from the fate of the Manchurians and the Mongolians because of Tibet's high altitude. The Chinese would like to work in Tibet, make money in Tibet, but they don't consider Tibet as China proper because of its high altitude, and there is sort of some superstition among Chinese women that if they are expecting babies, they should return to the lowlands and then come back to Tibet. So there is this high altitude of Tibet doesn't make Tibet as a place permanently to be settled. So they come to Tibet, work and return. So with the, as far as this collaboration between Tibetans, Manchurians, and we earlier on we had something called UNPO, Unrepresented People's Organization. All those who are not represented in the UN are members of this UNPO. So it's an attempt by His Holiness to give a common voice for people who suffer similar fate.
Thank you. If I can add to what Samphel had mentioned, there is on census reports, 2001 was the last they have made on the population profile in Tibet and other areas. So according to that, it is roughly 40-60 kind of profile, but this is some 15 years ago. So there is a huge change that has occurred on that population profile. Marong in Beijing University, he had published a book on the migration patterns of Han towards the Tibet region. So he divides three types of migration to Tibet. One is the permanent settlers, and they are about 1 to 2% of the total migrants. Second category is medium-term migrants who go to Tibet for odd jobs like a Tibet railway, road construction, an energy pipeline, some construction activity. Like we have, say, laborers from Bihar going to Ladakh, working there on projects and getting back. It's something of that sort. So this is a 3 to 5 year migration who are in a majority, according to this report by Maroon, because most of them are into the construction work, irrigation projects, and so on. The third category is long-term settlers, and that's where the 1% comes in. These are government officials, party officials, Xinhua news agency reporters, the banking employees, so they settle down for a long time, 1%. The medium-term settlers are about 3 to 5%, and short-term, that is, who stay in Tibet just for a year, doing some odd jobs. These are in a majority, according to Maroon's statistics. So that's roughly the pattern, but I agree with Samphel that this is the 7.5 million Chinese in. This figure comes from the recent infrastructure projects that China had undertaken in Tibet. TNI, the Tibet Network, Tibet Information Network, TIN, made some surveys of the Chinese projects in Tibet and the rest of, say, Xinjiang, Mongolia, and so on. So according to this study, if you lay down a road, a superhighway, or a railway line, for every 60 kilometers of a road project or a railway project, many of the local inhabitants are displaced from their livelihood issues, which includes a small-time business in the areas where the infrastructure project has been concluded. So there is many of these Han settlers who have utilized these roads, railways, etc. for migration. They have been able to displace the local Tibetans in many jobs, and these are very small jobs, like a small shop, or selling something, very small time jobs, small time occasions, including closer to Potala Palace. The entire area is now controlled by the Han Chinese in the small, like the Janpad that you see, small shops. All of them are Han Chinese. Previously, about 10-15 years ago, these were Tibetans, but after the infrastructure projects, these have now. There is also the Guangdong province and Shanghai. Investments have come in on a huge scale. So suddenly you see the architecture also changing into steel and glass buildings. Mostly these are the Guangdong Construction Bank, Shanghai Pudong Construction Bank. These have migrated into, like we see in the rest of India as well, where many of the real estate have occupied remote areas. So that's another pattern of migration. The Tibetan Railway had announced that 1 million tourists are carried by the Tibetan Railway every year into Tibet. They carry these many people into as tourists, basically. So tourists would be short-term stay people in many of these areas. So that's roughly a figure which could add to the number of those who are present. Then you have also those who work in construction jobs, mining and so on. That's a huge business. because Tibet sells nearly 5,000 tons of water to the rest of China every day. So that's a huge freshwater bottles. Water bottles are mainly sourced from Tibet rivers. So this is one which is a significant, and so the influx are taking place in these professions. Mining is another. Various mining projects have, and also in the hydroelectric projects, there are huge migrants. But these are all, as Marun says, 1 to 2% of the people in the. On the coordination aspect, in addition to what Samphel had mentioned, there is the coordination between Rubaya Khadir of World Uyghur Congress and the Mongolian. There is now a pan-Mongolia, Blue Mongolia as they call, group within Mongolia, and also Tibetans in various places, including Amsterdam, Washington DC. Princeton University has some projects on this, on the coordination aspect. So there is something happening on that front in terms of coordination.
I'm Ganesh Sandhu. I would like to revert back to the theme of the seminar, the importance of Tibet for India. Now, till such time the Tibet issue is settled, the Sino-Indian border issue cannot be settled. Until the border issue is settled, India cannot feel secure in its northern border of 4,000 kilometers. So it is important. The second point, on the question of arbitration and negotiations. If you recollect, the basis of 17-point agreement signed between China and Tibet in 1951 was the maintenance of autonomy of Tibet. And the reason, to my mind, of the 1959 rebellion in Tibet was that the China did not honor that agreement, and it was their coercive policies in Tibet which led to the rebellion, and not an instigation by India as China had believed. So I don't think China, any interceding by India on behalf of Tibet, China considers that as the interference in the internal affairs of China, and China is not amenable to talk to India either about Tibet or about Tibetans. That is the situation. Third point. The three regions, that is Inner Mongolia, Xinjiang and Tibet, have traditionally not been part of China, Han China. All these were annexed. Xinjiang was annexed in 1949. The PLA marched into it. Tibet was annexed in 1950. And also, if one looks at this map, the Mongolia, Inner Mongolia and Tibet are practically neighbors. I'm talking of the greater Tibet, if you include the Kham and the Amdo. The distance between separating Inner Mongolia and Tibet is just about 150 to 200 kilometers, with a narrow strip of Gansu province going through it, connecting it with Xinjiang. In fact, there has been a lot of historical pilgrimages and intercourse between Mongols and the Tibetans. This worries Chinese. So coming to this question of what might happen, if, like I said, these are the peripheral regions, regions not historically not part of Tibet. If China was to go the Soviet way at some point of time in future, and it can happen for various reasons, and as the central authority weakens, the peripheral regions tend to become autonomous. That is a scenario that can unfold at some point of time. And the last point I would like to say, though any talk by India about Tibet or Tibetans ruffles Chinese hair, but I don't think we need to be too much worried about it. India should raise the question of Tibet with China, because our claim to the McMahon line is based on the 1914 agreement between British India and Tibet. China was not a party to it because they did not sign the convention. So that agreement had two parts in it. One was the border between British India and Tibet. The second part of the agreement was to ensure autonomy of Tibet. So if India lays claim to the border based on that agreement, India also has a moral responsibility to get autonomy for Tibet. That is what should govern the Indian policy towards Tibet and China. Thank you.
Jan Sandhu raised 4 issues. Would you like to reflect on the arbitration portion, sir? The rest on the territorial dispute on China going the Soviet way, and
I think General Sandhu is to be thanked for having put the matter in a very clear and simple manner. There is no doubt that historically Tibet, as well as the other parts, Mongolia, etc., were distinct and separate from China. But from 1949 onwards, Communist China ventured forth in an aggressive manner and started claiming all these parts as part of China. Now, so far as we are concerned, we were alarmed, and we all know about Sardar Patel's letter, very anguished letter to Prime Minister Nehru, saying that we had allowed the Chinese to come right to our doorstep. But that is the reality today. The world has not protested against China establishing its sovereignty over Tibet. The world has not protested. China is there. And the Western world is interested in having trade relations with China, investments in China, and the Eastern world is terrified of China. So on the one hand there is greed, on the other hand there is fear. Now, in this situation, what is the best way out? According to me, the best way out is to try and moderate China in whatever manner we are able to. And if we succeed in that, well and good. If we do not, God knows what will happen. Because today there is indeed a new confrontation building up between China and the United States. Europe will be in a quandary, but the United States will surely not be very friendly towards China. Nor will China give up its aim of overreaching and going beyond the United States. So that is where we are. It's a very difficult situation, and I don't think any clear-cut answer is possible.
Thank you, Mr. Mukhi. You are part of the ministry till 64 as a legal advisor. In 65, India proposed in the UN to discuss about the Tibet representation. Would you like to comment on that?
No, as far as I remember, the matter was on the agenda of the Security Council. A complaint had been made on behalf of Tibet, and it was on the agenda of the Security Council. And when it came up for discussion, the chairman turned to the Indian delegate and asked what were India's views on the matter. And instead of India taking it up in an upright manner, our representative, and I'll tell you his name, Mr. C.S. Jha, said that India was not interested in a discussion before the Security Council because we were having friendly talks with China. And there the matter was stopped and it was shelved, and no more discussion in the Security Council.
Thank you for your input. There are three more issues of General Sandhu. Let us continue. One is on the territorial dispute and Tibet as a factor. Second, arbitration aspect, Mr. Mukhi had elaborated on that. Third, the uncertainty of China if it becomes like a Soviet Union, and the frontier area status. And fourth, General Sandhu also raised the issue of India being proactive on Tibet. Would you like to say something on these three?
Yes, with the issue of China's future uncertainty, I don't think my suggestion is that we shouldn't hang too much on this. There have been many predictions made about the coming collapse of China, the party going into a huge major disarray, but none has proved correct. So I think the only realistic course for us to recognize the existing realities. So with Tibet, our best hope is that China, with the leadership of President Xi Jinping, it would be not as closed door as it is now, but China, with his accumulation of power, he would emerge as a more confident leader and sees that and realizes that an open society is more secure, will mean a more secure China. So if he becomes more confident, he would also realize that this repression, suppression is not a good policy to govern any people, and that this tolerant society is a more secure society. And with that, the best hope we Tibetans see is that the world will in a common effort will persuade China that aside from the political issue of Tibet, that Tibet as a plateau should be considered a common global good, that China does not unilaterally change river courses or build dams that will give it control of this river waters. So, and also to persuade the Chinese government that the Tibetan people are the best guardians of how the environment of Tibet should be safeguarded for not only Tibetans but for millions of people in South Asia and Southeast Asia, including China. I mean, this is maybe a silly sort of suggestion, but this is what we feel should be done.
Why silly? On the two other points that Sandu raised, is Tibet a factor in the territorial dispute resolution? It stalls the resolution, that's the first person.
Right.
The other, which was also he raised was India should take a proactive position on Tibet.
Moral responsibility.
With the issue of Makhman line, I think His Holiness said many years ago, it's this issue which an independent Tibet conceded to British India. So as far as Tibets are concerned, the issue Chinese claims on Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh are unwarranted. That independent political, sovereign independent Tibet ceded this to British India. So we have, I mean, as we sort of back India on the border issue. And
border territorial dispute.
Right, and so on
Moral responsibility.
I think India has, this big moral responsibility. I mean, His Holiness has been tirelessly saying that we are the chela of this India, and he said we've been faithful disciples of India. So our Guru should, in a way, whenever the occasion arises, speak as an honest arbiter with Chinese to correct its behavior to the Tibetan people.
I want to add on these 3 points. Is Tibet a factor in the India-China territorial dispute resolution? Indeed. Most of the areas that both India and China are discussing are either part of Tibet or legacies of Tibet or British Indian territories which are linked to Tibet. In the sense that the McMahon line, where you have the NIFA areas, Northeast Frontier Agencies, which mainly composed of Tibetans, Lepchas, Mompas, who are traditionally having a cross-border kind of social interactions historically, and not always friendly between Tibet and the Trans-Himalayan regions within India. We have had these wars between Tibet and Ladakh previously in 16th, 17th centuries. So not so friendly interaction between Tibet and the rest of those Trans-Himalayan, yet it is a factor because the states have expanded. Chinese state, Indian states have expanded in those frontier regions. Both northwest frontier region in Pakistan today and northeast frontier area in Arunachal Pradesh today. So Tibet is a factor in the discussions between India and China. And informally, it's not so formal, but the issue of Tibet and its future also stalls the negotiations. As you all know that there were about 18 times the special representative meetings. Previously, from 1981 to 87, there were 8 talks between joint secretary level in the MEA, and then we had about 15 joint working group meetings between the foreign secretaries. So in all, about 35 years of discussion, we have not found a solution in the territorial dispute resolution. Part of this is linked to the uncertainty in Tibet. So I think it is a factor in the overall, and recently this is also getting connected to the, as the Chinese say in their official discourse, to the personal security of the Dalai Lama, as they mentioned in the negotiations the United Front Work Department interactions with the government in exile. This is the phrase they use. We are concerned about the personal safety future of the Dalai Lama, and in the light of the successor or reincarnation, this issue is linked to the territorial dispute as well. So that is one. On the second, can China go the Soviet way? As of now, as Samphel mentioned, Gordon Chang wrote that book of Coming Collapse of China. We have not seen that happening. On the other hand, last year Xi Jinping mentioned about preparations for the two centennials, 2021 and 2049. In other words, they have a medium to long-term preparation of consolidation of Chinese state rather than Chinese state disintegration. So if that happens, then I don't think there is China going the Soviet way on that front. Should India raise this issue on Tibet as a moral responsibility? Yes. I think it has been raised. Remember in 2008-9 when the Beijing Olympics protests happened in Lhasa, when the torch was taken to Mount Everest, there were a number of protests in Lhasa and the rest of Tibet. During this time, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was the External Affairs Minister. He mentioned in a very oblique way when Nancy Pelosi was going to Dharamshala to meet and discuss the issues. At that time, Mr. Mukherjee said, "We hope there is peace and stability in Tibet." That was a very unusual statement from the External Affairs Minister of India. Of course, nothing really happened on that front because Indian official policy as articulated in 1954, 1988, 2003 by Vajpayee and others suggests Tibet is part of the PRC. From that perspective, from the official perspective, it cannot play a very open role on raising the Tibet issue from those three positions of 1954, 1988, 2003. Having said that, it also has repercussions. For example, when after the death of Wani in Kashmir, Chinese Foreign Ministry raised this issue of peace and stability in Kashmir. And there were some reports in the Chinese press also stating that they will form a Han Foundation, will invite JKLF leaders and form a government in exile for Kashmiris. So there are also the countermeasures from China if these reports are to be believed. And so India raising Tibet issue also has its own consequences. Having said that, we have seen that the present government had taken very proactive positions, including the Sikkim being invited for the Prime Minister's inaugural function in 2014, which is unusual because we have not seen previously the Sikkim was invited for any of the prime ministerial functions. So this was an unusual one. Also, the Sikkim today has a Z category security, which means that there is the Indian state providing security to the Sikkim, which also has a certain state element in it in terms of protection thirdly, we have also seen that in terms of the strategic roads and others, there is a massive expansion in the Indian expenditure in relation to the Trans-Himalayan regions. So that is, I would also say, is a proactive. Fourthly, Manmohan Singh government raised a strike core, which is still in the process of being raised with huge allocations. As you know that strike corps is not a defensive force, unlike the previous 11 divisions that Indian Army has. It is a proactive and as the word goes, it has to take a an offensive position, which means, again, I would say that it has a certain military interest in terms of Tibet and beyond.
On the future of China, I remember a few points. I think trying to wish ill for China violates the thinking of His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. Whenever His Holiness meets Chinese students, scholars, he frames the issue of Tibet as a struggle which is not anti-China nor anti-Chinese people. He says the Tibetan struggle is pro-justice. And he acts on his word by, when China's economy was low and developing, America has its most favored trading nation status. So His Holiness supported that America should grant most favored nation trading status to China. On the issue of whether China should be awarded the Olympic Games before 2008, His Holiness said he supports the Olympic Committee awarding the Games to Beijing because China is the most populous nation on earth. Its culture is very ancient, and the Chinese people deserve to host the Olympic Games. So in this way, I think so. His Holiness's approach to the Chinese people, that by his words and deeds he will not do anything which harms the interests of the common Chinese people. And this sentiment has been reciprocated. You know, this leading Chinese intellectuals in China, including Liu Xiaobao, who won the Nobel Peace Prize and who is presently in jail, wrote an open letter to the Chinese government way back in 2008. And in the letter, they said they supported the peace initiatives of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and they requested the Chinese government to refrain from using China's huge state media to this create animosity between Tibetans and the Chinese people. So in this way, not only spiritually, their attraction to Buddhism, but also their attraction to the message of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, though it will take time, will somehow might rise up to the government level to compel the Chinese authorities to behave more civilly with the Tibetan people.
Please.
Yes, sorry. My only fear is after listening to this, history has had its lessons, and a lot of young men have died in 1962 war, which was, again, Nehru had great hopes for China, and it was great friendship, and then there was this war that took place. The only fear is this, that Tibet should not become another Kashmir. Tibet should not become another bone of contention between these two major powers. And to retain its autonomy, there has to be certain firm lines as to some measures to be taken to ensure the peace of Tibet if it's going to be autonomous. It's all very well. I agree with the Dalai Lama. The spiritual aspect is great. I mean, if he could feel secure in Tibet, the very fact is he's not secure in Tibet. His life is in danger. And many other monks who are peaceful, their lives are in danger. It's a peaceful religion. And if China is really following Buddhism, why would it hurt the Tibetans? Why would it kill the monks? All that's happened is history. So we can't really turn a blind eye to history, and so this should be, we have to also take into factor all that has happened and all.
Excuse me, what is the question that you have?
The question is the fear. It's a comment that it's all very well, the dialogue, but that fear still remains. India-Tibetan relationships, how much it's impacting, is the impact of fear and what's happened in the past can repeat itself.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Would you like to respond?
Yes, I'll make a brief response. I think the enduring dilemma of governance in Tibet by the Chinese authorities is that China has physically controlled Tibet. But China's problem is that the minds and hearts and minds of the Tibetan people are elsewhere with His Holiness here in India. So this very fact makes the Chinese government sort of feel nervous about just one individual, that he has totally captivated or retained the devotion of all Tibet. So this is the Chinese, this fear. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, when Jiang Zemin was the president and the party secretary of China, he told, visiting this head of state, that even inviting His Holiness to China for just a simple visit would, make the Tibetans go mad, the Mongolians will go mad with the Tibetans, and the whole of civil society, or those who are disgruntled with the party, will join the madness. So he said, if we somehow tamp down on this sort of potential turmoil, there would be a huge international outcry. If the party does not crack down on, on such disturbance, the party's hold on power would be totally undermined. So this is, I think, the party's governance problem with the Tibetan people, that they are physically under the party's control, but their hearts, minds, and devotion are with His Holiness.
Thank you. Would you like to add something, sir? Whether 62 will repeat, that I think is the main issue.
I don't think 62 will repeat. I think that we are in for better times.
On the 62, the Extended Central Military Commission met in September 1962, and Mao Zedong made a comment in that. He said that for the next 30 years we should have armed coexistence. Once the armed action is taking place, there will be a kind of coexistence between the two nations. Secondly, he mentioned that China is going to war in 62 for two reasons. One, India is interfering in China's internal affairs by giving refuge to the Dalai Lama, number one. Number two, India had initiated the forward policy of establishing outposts of over 120 military outposts in the Trans-Himalayan region. This is the second reason why we are going to war with India. Now, these two reasons still exist even now. That is, technically, the Tibetan refugees and the Dalai Lama are stationed in India. To that extent, there is the role that it plays in the relations with China. Secondly, India is also, like China is doing the infrastructure projects, India is also doing expansion of the strategic roads, railways, advanced landing grounds, deployment of troops, the new air bases in Hashimara, Chabua and Tejpur, and a host of other developments. So the 1962 events still prevail even in 2016 from the point of view of what Mao Zedong said in September 1962. So to the extent that these have an impact on a war or a war-like situation, we do have the same conditions now. But the reality is India is different as compared to 62, China is different in the sense that today these are second largest economies and third largest economies. These are also, their profile has increased substantially. Most important, they are also nuclear powers. Unlike in 62, when both are not nuclear powers. So, can 62 repeat? No, it will not repeat because of the changed situation now we have.
The biggest change is that we do not have Krishna Menon.
Yes. Well, we all know that this Shangri-La in the Himalayas, our heavenly abode, stands a land of long tranquillities, calmnesses and quietnesses, stands devoured and digested by the dragon, about which some of the premonitions and forecasts were made in the history, maybe by Napoleon around 1815, Swami Vivekananda in 1898, that if and when British leave India, there is every possibility of China invading India. In 1950, Sri Aurobindo too made a similar prediction, and Mr. Mukhi quoted Sardar Patel's letter on November 7, 1950. So we all say that our leadership and statesmanship couldn't envision all this, though there was much hullabaloo, much furor in media, in press and all that regarding the impending Chinese invasion. And Krishna Menon in 1961 in the United States, addressing a press conference, was inquiring if any force in the world can fight at a height of 12,000 feet. In December 1961, he inquired from media in the United States. So ultimately, the tragedy came in 1962. So the thing is, why our leadership, the statesmanship and the wisdom and the intelligence at their command couldn't envision a sort of an invasion by Communist China around 1962. There was a paper I read in 1959, 60, 61. It carried a very long series of articles captioned in defense of Comrade Krishna Menon. For 2 years, the contributor went on writing, and ultimately it was compiled into a book form, all those articles of 2 years. So he amply cleared, told everybody in all his articles that there is impending danger from China or the Chinese aggression. Secondly, as somebody said that Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, they are annexations. What percentage of Chinese territory is totally annexed territory? Of present area of China, how much is annexed territory of China? What percentage?
Briefly, China is 9 million square kilometers, and the Middle Kingdom that we generally speak is about 16 provinces, which are generally coastal eastern provinces. The rest are all kind of occupied during the Qing dynasty and before the western expansion took place, if that is the question that you raised.
But
do you have a specific question? We are running out of time.
you have mentioned that we made
120 military after 1962 or in 1962. But the fact is that in 1950 we had 100 military posts. We headed over to China right away, and we had to rebuild up again after losing mandate of Tibet. You have mentioned specifically about Indian posts, and which most of them mentioned in 1962. But we had already handed over to them 100 military posts in 1950. So how is the difference?
No, we had, British India had, at least not we, British India had some positions in Tibet during the 1940s and till about 1950. These were surrendered to the Chinese, including the Lhasa garrison and a few others. So, not that we lost anything, but that's not technically correct.
Lhasa garrison and the post telegraphs.
That's
That was also inherited by India. We gave up everything.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all the panelists. on behalf of the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile and the co-organizer IIC. The subject or the matter is very vast, and the issue is very not small things, but issue is a very complicated, and issue itself is remained. So today's program is not like battled in a field, but it's issues which today in a global, or we can say today is in Asia, or particularly which we have given a mention, the subject, the direct link with India, its own security. Not only the border security, but as our various speakers has mentioned about the border security, the geopolitics, and then of course the environment, and then the survival of the cultural and basically the international law, the human rights. So with this all, I think, subject is relevant with the importance to the India and Tibet itself. The alive of the Tibet issue is very important. During the Prime Minister of India raised the issues, the Baltistan and Baltic, and then the issue was blooming in the India's entire channel. The entire think tank is discussing about the Islam and exile, that, and then the rest of the communities who are in India. There's the exile community. So many of the, I think, intellectuals has mentioned that the issue, the refugees or the Islam or in the exile in India, the alive of the issue is important until or unless the result of each and every conflict. Therefore, on the purpose of that, today's panel discussion, for the long run, the issues of the Tibet are alive. Not only among the Tibetan community, but as the issues which relevant with the neighboring countries. And through the alive of the Tibet issue is not only the speaking and to outreach by the Tibetan community. We feel it. We have numbers of Indian intellectuals who are experts on the India and Tibet, China, and particularly the issues of Tibet. In the different fields, in the Indian community and Indian society, with several times. And sir, under your guidance, under your support, today we have more than 50 Tibetan students who are doing an MPhil and PhD in Jawaharlal Nehru University. In 97 and 98, when I used to go in JNU, only single Tibetans will find there. But today, many of students have already done the PhD in MPhil. Jigme Ishi, now he is working in Calcutta. With your guidance. And when we met you in July, I proposed this panel program, and you had agreed to chair. Not only the chair, but we requested to continue to speak the foreign policy of India, the impact. Because we already approached the respected Yashwant Sinha ji, but he had already engaged some other program, and then we requested the Kondapalli country to speak. So thank you so much. Your busy schedule, the university is, I think, classes are not too easy to get free from you. I think whenever you are in the conference meeting and then the busy with the students. Thank you so much. Rajiv Mehrotra ji, as I already did, thanks to him because very long friend, close to His Holiness and close to the Tibetans. The Tibet Policy Institute Director, the scholar in intellectual think tank, humble and simple, Thubten Samphel. I requested him when Kondapalli was asked to request Samphel to bring him and to give status of Tibet. We need one Tibetan representative. So then the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile, we requested him to be kindly to accept our invitation to being a panelist as a Tibetan representative. Thank you so much, Samphel. And particularly, I think, here the many of our old friends, I think the intellectuals think tank, who are the very good friend of the Tibetan community and Tibetan, particularly when I was working with the Tibetan Parliament Policy Research Center, we invited several intellectuals who may speak on the different issues. And thank you so much, the entire our intellectuals. Some of our invitation also we have sent it to the various ambassadors and the political section. A few of ambassadors represented also attended this panel discussion. Thank you so much. And I give thanks to all my Tibetan, our dignitaries who have attended here, and the students from the various IIT, JNU, Delhi University. Many of them also attended this panel discussion. I hope that this will be useful for the future of the Indian brightness. And thanks to the IIC, when in October we have requested to the venue, and then the Premila goes, we are going to give a venue event. We will also jointly to organize this program. And normally we have to approach to kindly to organize jointly, but they have voluntarily to give in their such a pleasure. They are also going to jointly to organize this panel discussion. And because of His Holiness, I think honor to His Holiness, respect to His Holiness. So I see not only the venue, entire the idea and support how to organize. And so yesterday we came down, we were in Dharamsala, entire the IIC has done. And thank you so much in the IIC, the staff, and the executive programmer, executive director. I give thanks to the Tibetan media, and especially we are here, the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile, we have 3 sections. The political section, administrative section, and the finance section. With me here, we have entire political sections of parliamentarians to come down and to organize the program. And I will thank to the PA, the Kaishan Alliance, communicate and contact with continuously with our speakers and the other rest of the task. Finally, I hope this program will be helpful for the alive of the Tibet's issue and for the policymaker of the India government through the think tank. Normally, entire global, through the think tank, the policy concise and constructive, and that I think, myself as a parliamentarian, I knew without the think tank, we can't do anything. With this vote, thank you so much, because next I think the IIC, they need their venue, and continue to join the lunch, and thank you so much. Would like to honor our panelists, the small gifts, symbolic of the Parliament.